Good evening, my lovelies, and Yuletide greetings to all. Today we have two tales of Christmas horrors for you. Both are from Creepypasta Wiki. So let's get on with the first tale now, shall we, my dears? Come, lean in closer, and we'll begin. My son heard something on the roof last night. Police lights cover our living room as I type this. It was Christmas Eve and we were all tucked into bed like we should have been. That was when I heard a pounding sound coming from the ceiling. My wife rustled a bit in her sleep but remained still. I, on the other hand, could not. I got up out of bed and went to check on my son. When I got to his bedroom, he wasn't there, which scared me. I rushed out of his room and looked over the stairs balcony into the living room. There was my son, standing in front of the chimney next to all the presents my wife and I had wrapped just an hour ago. Great, I thought. It looked like we'd get no sleep before we'd have to open presents. I journeyed downstairs and made my way past the kitchen and into the living room. "Hey, champ," I said in a groggy voice. "What are you doing up so early?" My son turned to me and said, "I heard Santa Claus on the roof, and I wanted to come down and see him." I raised an eyebrow as I glanced at the presents he was steadily ignoring beside him. "Looks like Santa brought you a lot of gifts this year. You must have been a good boy." My son looked to the ground with a frown. "Why the long face, bud?" "Santa says you wrapped those gifts yourself." "Oh yeah? You've talked to Santa, have you?" He looked back down at the floor. "He told me not to tell you." This had me a little worried. I wondered if my wife had taken our son to the mall Santa and maybe he'd been drunk and spilled the beans about the magic of Christmas to our child. "Don't listen to that Santa, buddy. Those presents have Santa's name on them. Now, how about we open some gifts? I'll wake your mother up, and as soon as I make her a cup of coffee, we'll open these bad boys, okay?" He turned back to the chimney, and I went to go brew my wife a cup of coffee. As the coffee brewed, I could hear my son whispering something to himself. "Hey, bud, who are you talking to?" He turned around and said, "Santa." Then he fell to his knees and collapsed into his palms. I looked towards the chimney and saw a long, slim, black and grey striped sweater arm going down the chimney with a long-fingered, bony hand around my son's ankle. I dropped the mug of coffee to the ground, shattering it to pieces, and took a few steps forward, but it was all fruitless. The chimney absorbed my son, pulling him upward into it. His screams echoed off the bricks until the only thing I could hear was pounding on the ceiling. No, the rooftop. I ran outside, ignoring my wife's yells from upstairs, and quickly peered up at the roof, where a tall, scrawny, old bearded man stood. His eyes were sunken in, and the eyes themselves were pitch black. Antlers extended from his forehead, stretching out towards the night sky. He had a bulging sack over his shoulder. It must have been my son, squirming inside the bag for dear life. The bearded man looked over at me, put a finger to his lips, then leaped onto my neighbor's rooftop and then to the next until he was out of sight. My wife ran outside to me and asked me where our son was. I told her to call the police, which she did. And that brings us to where we are now. police have questioned me repeatedly. At first, I gave them the true story of what happened. When they didn't buy it, I changed my story and they threw it up to me, being shaken by what had happened. In the end, I told them there had been a robbery and my son had been kidnapped. What I told the police before, though, was that my boy had heard Santa on the rooftop. But I don't think it was Santa. This second tale is by author Red Nova Tyrant. "12 seems to be the age when kids start putting the heat on their parents about the truth behind Santa. I was certainly no exception to this rule. How were Santa's elves able to make that video game I wanted in their workshop? I thought Nintendo owned Mario. Or how about the ever infamous visiting every house in one night question? Did the jolly man own some kind of time-extending device? Or perhaps the most obvious question of all, how could he have lived for this long? A lot of people say he trains apprentices who take his place every few decades. Others claim he's just immortal. As for everything else, magic seemed to be the universal lie everyone had agreed on. Whatever the case, I just went with the conclusion that it was my parents' doing. Of course, they deny it and claim ignorance if I confronted them, but it wasn't enough to dissuade my beliefs. So one Christmas Eve, when I couldn't sleep as these questions danced among my dreams of sugar cereals and new games, I decided to investigate the noises coming from my living room. This time, surely, I would catch my dad or mom in the act of stowing presents under the tree. At least then, they'd let me in on the truth. But as I entered the living room, I saw a man before me that I did not recognize. He was dressed in red and white with a slightly overweight body, and he wore a stringy fake white beard. His hair, or what remained of it, was graying around the edges of his classic Santa hat, and his eyes were wide with fright as he dropped a present under the tree. Being the intuitive youth I was, I came to one of two conclusions. Either this was a home invader stealing my family's gifts, or this was the real Santa. I opened my mouth to scream, but the man rushed towards me and covered my mouth. "Shh, shh, shh, shh," he said, putting a finger to his mouth, trying to smile. Tears began to roll down my cheeks. I was petrified of this man. Then slowly, he took back his hand and extended it towards me. "It's all right there, little one. You know who I am, right?" I nodded, not shaking his hand back. The trembling man nodded as well, then grabbed an empty sack lying on the floor and gestured to the tree. "Look, see? I bring gifts. Now, run along to bed, or I might have to put you on the naughty list." He started drifting towards the deeper, hearty voice stereotypically associated with Kris Kringle, but I wasn't fooled. Regardless, I wiped my eyes and began to step back from the living room, trying to create some distance between me and the stranger. The man simply watched, wiped his brow, and proceeded to approach the fireplace. I stopped and observed, confused as to how he was going to leave my house, but a blast of green flames erupted from the chimney and the man fell back to the floor. I couldn't see his face, but I'm certain it was twisted in fear like my own. A massive bony hand spawned from the fire, and the arm that followed was draped in raggedy fur. Then another arm, and then the skull of some wild creature with 2 large horns followed, nearly as large as the fireplace itself. The bones popped and snapped as it slammed its hands onto the floor. The entire monster was engulfed in the flame, yet it did not seem to burn anything in the house. "Eddie," the monster declared, speaking to what I guessed to be the man on the floor. "No, no!" Eddie shouted back. "I did my part, see? 10,000 houses, just like you said, right? 10,000! I did my part!" "And yet you allowed a human child to see you. You know the rules." Look, I've learned my lesson. I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Just let me go, please. I delivered all the..." "Let you go? Did you let that woman go, Eddie? I don't seem to recall you letting her go. This was your second chance, and you wasted it." "What are you going to do?" Eddie whispered. I could make out his quaking figure being overshadowed by the creature in the fireplace. The next sound to be heard was a crunch, with a soft beginning and snapping finish. I jumped as the sound repeated a few times, finally letting out a shaky breath. I prayed in my head that it wasn't what I thought, but when the creature reared its head towards me, I saw the red and white pants hanging from its mouth as it chewed on Eddie's corpse, then watched it slurp up his legs like strands of spaghetti. I covered my eyes and tried to tell myself it wasn't real, it wasn't real, it wasn't real. And after a quiet minute, I peeked between my fingers to see the monster staring back at me from the fireplace. The pace of my breathing grew quicker and sharper, my eyes unable to escape from the grasp of those empty eye sockets. "Now, run off to bed, little one, or else I might put you on the naughty list." My legs finally found the strength to leave, and I sprinted for my parents' room, diving into the sheets with them. There wasn't a trace of the events of the night before when my family went down to the tree the next morning. There was even a little note next to an empty glass and a half-eaten cookie on the table. "Have a Merry Christmas, S. Claus." As much as I tried to take in the warm, comforting atmosphere that came with Christmas Day, I couldn't stop watching the fireplace, terrified that the monster would return. At the least, I now knew the truth about Santa Claus. I hope you enjoyed those 2 tales, my dears. If you have just stumbled into my realm, what a Merry Christmas indeed it is for you. Before you leave, do hit subscribe to be notified of new uploads. For those of you who have found me on YouTube, hit that bell icon as well. If you enjoyed this tale or have recommendations of tales you would like me to perform, leave me a comment below if you're watching on YouTube, or pop me a message on social media. I am Lady Creepypasta on both Facebook and Twitter. That's all I have for you this evening, my dears. Do have yourself a good Yuletide, and I'll see you soon.